I'm Cynthia Rowland, and this is episode 158 of EO Radio Show. This is the first of 3 episodes focusing on gift acceptance policies for public charities. So here's the roadmap. In this part, the first part, will have an introduction as to why gift acceptance policies matter, what they are, the governing principles, and who makes the decisions at each step of the gift intake process. In part 2, we'll cover the gift spectrum, the asset types from easy to hard that are addressed in a gift acceptance policy. And we'll do a little deeper dive into real estate diligence, since that's a pretty common complex asset. In part 3, we'll cover compliance, recognition, and implementation. In that episode, we'll talk about the IRS requirements for reporting charitable contributions, and all that is often addressed in the gift acceptance policy. We'll talk a little bit about how donor recognition and endowment restrictions are addressed in the typical gift acceptance policy, and we'll talk about putting the policy to work. So those are the 3 parts, and today we'll focus on the basics and the introduction of a gift acceptance policy. Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world, because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here. Today we'll start with talking about why an organization would benefit from a gift acceptance policy and how the gift acceptance process is managed. So let's talk a little bit about why a gift acceptance policy is important, what it is, and why it matters. The core message for everyone to take away from this episode is that not every gift should be accepted. Sometimes saying no thank you is the most prudent path and is in the best interest of the organization. Some gifts simply cost more in hassle and expense than they deliver. So the gift acceptance policy is a written framework defining the gifts the organization can and cannot accept and the process for handling them from the beginning of the process through the actual acceptance of the gift and then the deployment of the gift. The gift acceptance policy is also very useful for training purposes and for orienting the development staff as part of the organization's gift development strategy. The gift acceptance policy does the heavy lifting when unusual or high-value non-cash gifts are offered, and the staff needs to know the best way to approach it. The gift acceptance policy protects both the donor's interests and the charity's interests. It's a way of managing donor expectations respectfully while guiding board and staff through the process. The main 4 benefits of a well-crafted gift acceptance policy are, first, that it provides the discipline for the diligence in deciding whether and on what terms to accept a gift. The next benefit is that it educates principally the staff, but it also can be used as a tool for educating prospective donors. It's an extremely important piece of your donor relationship structuring for the organization. And a good gift acceptance policy also follows best practices in the charitable industry. A good gift acceptance policy also reduces ad hoc decision-making and helps staff to understand the reputational risks and liabilities the organization may face if gift opportunities are mishandled. So there is a really strong upside in having a well-developed gift acceptance policies. Organizations that know how to handle complex gifts, from marketable securities to real estate to interest in private companies, those organizations can grow their contributions substantially faster than organizations that accept only gifts of cash. A good gift acceptance policy is an enabler, not just a shield. After talking about the components of a good policy, keep in mind that the gift acceptance policy follows all the way through the diligence process, closing the gift, and then reporting the gift on the IRS Form 990. We'll cover that in depth in the 3rd part of this series. But keep in mind that a policy isn't just about good hygiene. The IRS and regulators do expect to know that you have a gift acceptance policy, and having a policy in place will be very helpful if you hit rocky roads in a particular gift situation. So what are the governing principles in a gift acceptance policy? First, the big idea is that it protects the donor. A good gift acceptance policy will have as one of its primary focuses in the diligence phase the donor's situation and the donor's interests. It's never appropriate for an organization to encourage an inappropriate gift that goes beyond the donor's means or that offers benefits that are not reasonable under the circumstances. Now, keep in mind that the policy should ensure that the staff members who are implementing it stay in their lane. The charity and its staff should not be giving legal advice, tax advice, or financial advice to donors. Donors need to rely on their own counsel. Now, that's not to say that charity staff shouldn't be aware of the basic legal implications, the tax consequences, and how financial planning will play into a donor's decision about when and whether and what to give. However, it is always up to the donor, and it is very important that the donor be encouraged to seek their own counsel and make sure that their expectations align with what the tax and other legal ramifications are of a particular gift. It's also important to keep in mind that conflict of interest principles may come into play in some gift situations. It's really important that the gift acceptance policy helps the staff to avoid the trauma of soliciting a gift that has serious unintended negative consequences for the donor or the charity, or both, if there is a conflict in the financial interest between the donor and the charity. Sometimes this comes into play when the donor is a board member that's giving a complex gift. Next topic that's really important in your basic policy is that the gift acceptance policy should ensure that staff members maintain donor confidentiality. It's obviously extremely important that donor information is managed in a systems way to ensure that there's no leakage of confidential information, either from a hacker or just to insiders who shouldn't have access to the information. So the gift acceptance policy will cover confidentiality principles, and it should ensure that donor information is held in strict confidence, that donor recognition is not made absent explicit written permission. Next topic that the policy should consider is that the organization should seek independent counsel when crafting binding pledge agreements or binding gift agreements. Sometimes a gift is very straightforward. The gift instrument is simply, I give this gift of cash for the capital campaign, something like that. You don't necessarily need a lawyer for that. But if it's a planned gift agreement with multiple tranches, conditions that need to be milestones that are expected to be shown before additional gifts are made, complicated reporting, many of those sorts of gift agreements do benefit from independent counsel for the donor and sometimes for the charity as well to make sure that the conditions for the gift are reasonable under the circumstances. This is particularly important, for example, in major gifts to support the building of a facility. Things like that where donors rightfully may want to make the gifts as the construction progresses, but on the flip side, the charity needs to know that the gift can be counted on. And so a good agreement is very important in that situation. And the gift acceptance policy will be clear that as to who is authorized to review and sign those sorts of complex agreements with their donors. Often, charities are offered restricted gifts for particular purposes or programs that the charity may be running, and that's a wonderful thing. Unless the program needs to end, unless the program is underfunded, unless. There are many things that can cause a program to need to be modified. But when gifts are restricted to a particular program or a particular use, it's really important that the gift acceptance policy have as a default that the organization will accept restrictions if they're approved by senior staff. But it is also always important to start from a baseline that if the program needs to be ended, then the charity will decide how to use the balance of the gift. Now, oftentimes that becomes a negotiating point. If the donor is a private foundation, it's relatively simple to say as an exit strategy, if the restricted purpose later becomes impractical or unattainable, then the remaining amount of the gift goes back to the donor foundation. But obviously you can't give the money back to an individual donor, or at least if that is the plan under the agreement, that's a complicated situation, and the gift agreement at the outset needs to be clear that that's a possible exit strategy. So the point here is that the gift acceptance policy needs to make it clear that restricted gifts need the attention of senior staff at the least and outside legal counsel or in-house legal counsel in many cases. Another important point of the gift acceptance policy is that for most organizations, the objective of the diligence process is to make it clear that the charity intends to convert the gift to cash as soon as possible. So it is very important as a baseline expectation that there always must be a viable exit strategy or liquidation potential for any complex gift of an asset other than cash. This is a key factor for acceptance of a gift. We'll talk about this thread a bit more in the second part of this series. So as I mentioned, the gift acceptance policy also needs to have clear lines of authority and governance for accepting gifts. Typically, there are tiered levels of authority. There may be some gifts that an executive can accept on his or her own initiative. That is, things like gifts of cash without complex restrictions, gifts of publicly traded securities that can be sold on the next business day immediately after receipt, gifts of unrestricted bequests. Once the bequest becomes irrevocable, oftentimes there's not a lot of decision to be made if it's a gift of cash, and so an executive can usually do that without going to a committee or to the board to accept. And sometimes restrictions that are relatively straightforward may be delegated, the decision-making may be delegated to senior staff. Then there are others that need board approval. Almost always a gift of real property should go to the board. Gifts of closely held stock or interest in a limited liability company. Gifts of tangible personal property, and we'll talk about this a bit more in the next episode, but unless you already have an established, say, auto acceptance policy or things like that, most gifts of tangible personal property will benefit from board review. And other sorts of complex gifts and restricted gifts usually need to go to board or a board committee for approval. For many organizations that have a very robust development strategy, having a gift acceptance committee of the board is a very useful standing committee so that not all complex gifts must go to the full board. These are ideal when you have well-seasoned and sophisticated key staff functions that can review non-cash and non-standard gifts objectively and can bring it to board members who have the ability to look at the gifts and confirm that it is consistent with the board's expectations and fits in with all the other needs of the organization. So a standing committee for gift acceptance can be a very useful feature. Finally, the gift acceptance policy should also make it clear that the organization has the right to decline a gift. It's really important to empower staff so that they know that any gift that's inconsistent with the organization's mission, that poses undue costs or risks, that comes with built-in liabilities and an unclear path to how those liabilities will be funded, or gifts that have reputational risk from the very beginning, are the sorts of things that an organization needs to make clear in its policy that staff can decline. Finally, the gift acceptance policy can also say that bequests can be refused by the organization if the gift simply isn't appropriate or is too small for the amount of diligence it would take, or if the organization determines that liquidating the gift or deploying the gift in accordance with the donor strategy isn't something that's appropriate for the organization. So to close out this session and recap the basic idea here, a well-crafted gift acceptance policy protects both sides, the donor and the charity, and keeps both sides disciplined in their diligence and assigns clear authority. Now, the listeners, I'm sure, can find any number of gift acceptance policies on the internet or can use their favorite AI tool to spin up a gift acceptance policy. It's really important that the policy be looked at through the lens of the organization's skill set and the types of gifts that it is well positioned to accept and deploy. In the next session, we'll apply these principles to real gifts. We'll talk about gifts of cash with restrictions. We'll talk about gifts as novel as cryptocurrency, and we'll talk about gifts of real estate. And all of these in light of the diligence that's necessary in order to ensure that the exit strategy and the avenue to converting these to cash that can be used in the organization's charitable purposes will be top of mind. Because we want each of these kinds of gifts to be able to be used to advance the organization's mission and not to divert the staff from the mission, or even worse yet, pose reputational or financial risk on the organization. So be sure to check the show notes for links to some of the resources that would be helpful in crafting a gift acceptance policy and some other useful episodes on these topics. I'm Cynthia Rowland, and you've been listening to EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. If you have suggestions for topics you would like for us to discuss, please email us at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, make a difference.